Well, joining us now to discuss this further, whether fears around land reform and the debate on expropriation are justified at all, is General Secretary of the Congress of Traditional Leaders, Zolani Mkiva, and Sizwe Mapindani, President of the Black-Centric Forum. A very good evening to you, Sizwe. Thank you so much for joining us.
I really appreciate it.
Now, do you think that the fears around land expropriation and land reform are actually justified? Should people be scared of the idea of land reform?
You see, this whole idea, especially for land expropriation public hearing, it's proof, it symbolizes that Nelson Mandela's government is weak enough to redeem South Africa to its rightful owners. Where was this public hearing when the king or the chief of the Bapedi people, Dinakwana, was killed by the Boers for protecting his people's land? Where was this public hearing on land expropriation when the king of the Zulus, Shaka, was killed in cold blood by his own brothers, perpetuated by the enemy? And where was this public hearing when the king of the Batsonga, Ngungunyani, when the king of the Xhosas, Chungwa and Mzambe? It was not all in there. So what I think about, especially with regards to so-called expropriation, expropriation will therefore mean that we are taking somebody else's own property for state benefit. Here you have got dispossession of a people's land, and white didn't come and negotiate with our people. When they came and dispossessed the land, they were carrying guns. There was nothing to discuss thereafter. Our people are the one whose land was expropriated without compensation. So I find this public hearing an insult to the fallen heroes, to the death of Chris Hani fighting for the independence. You can't say South Africa is independent when the land is owned by the enemy. Because independence means ownership. It doesn't mean the right to vote. The only thing they do is to what? Is to give us a charismatic black leader for us to celebrate 67 minutes. But they have nothing to give us in terms of independence. And this includes our land.
But don't you think that the hearings are actually important because views like the views that you have, those strong views about the fact that land was stolen wrongfully and it was taken without expropriation, those views have to be heard for the Constitution to be amendment? Isn't then the public hearings the right platform or way to get to hear views such as yours and mine?
No, it is not at all. Because first of all, when whites, I'll repeat to you, when whites dispossessed the land, there was no public hearing. This is the same as going to a rapist and a victim, therefore putting them together and asking if the victim will want justice for them against the rapist or the perpetrator. It is actually clear that what they're saying about this, the problem with the so-called land expropriation without compensation, they said the land must belong to the state. What is the state? A Eurocentric foundation. The land didn't even belong to kings and white. In some instances, they did negotiate with the gun with all of those kings, and they ended up what? Extracting the land that didn't even belong to them. The land belongs to the community. It was communally owned. So now if you're saying that land expropriation should be discussed by the public, people don't even understand what land expropriation is. So what is the point of us discussing this thing? Because at the end of the day, the black politician or the political elite will go back and therefore they will revise, still subscribing to white supremacist policies that have already been set up in the Constitution. The South African Constitution is what? It's a mix-up of the Romans and the Dutch law. The Dutch oppressed blacks in South Africa. The Romans have oppressed blacks in Africa. And you're subscribing and you're applying and endorsing the law in order to run an African government. That is unacceptable.
Well, so the Parliament actually has already passed the fact that they think that the Constitution should be amended to give back the land to its rightful owners. So if you're saying we shouldn't have public hearings, what is the process that you think is lawful enough to actually take that land and give it back to its rightful owners without giving them compensation? Because currently the Constitution says in Section 25 that you must, expropriate with compensation. So how then can it be changed without that dialogue between the government and the people who this land actually belongs to?
I think Parliament says they've passed, what act did they pass? Parliament didn't pass anything. Parliament only made an amendment. No, it's not even an amendment.
They passed a resolution for there to be an amendment to Section 25 of the Constitution, but they need your voice before they can actually put that into law.
I think it is just the political scheming to say, let's actually amass for votes, because they know that the land is spiritual to black people. They do not mean it. Look at, for instance, Cyril Ramaphosa, a capitalist. How can a capitalist who himself owned farms, and what credential have he become the chairman of the McDonald's in South Africa? And what credential did he become a shareholder in all of these mines in South Africa? As a political elite who will be used to protect white capital, white supremacy, and the land that the whites have stolen from blacks. So even if this thing can, in fact, it can't even be passed. I will wait for the day whereby there is an amendment that has been passed as a bill, because if Parliament have agreed that the Constitution must be amended, then what is the point of consulting with the people? Are you going to ask the people, blacks in particular, whether or not they want their land back? We are dispossessed. We are the one waking up every morning, going into white corporations, begging for a job. We are begging for jobs. We are begging for houses in which we live. We are begging for even simple things such as basic shelter. We're begging for shelter. From who? All of these white corporations. So it doesn't help for us to actually have even a public hearing. If they are serious about returning the land to the rightful owners, they need, therefore, to return the land. Consult with kings and chiefs.
But I mean, you just mentioned something. They're consulting with the kings and chiefs. Public hearings involves consulting with the kings. It involves consulting with the chiefs. And according to the government, they don't plan to touch traditional land. They want to take other land, including state-owned land, and begin to compensation from that land. They don't plan to touch traditional land.
Okay, they don't plan to touch traditional land, but we had politicians talking about the Ingoma and Gonyama Trust, which is owned by a black king. And black people own less than 10% of the land in South Africa. So if you're not going to touch traditional land, for which is good, but still they're saying what? They're saying that the land must belong to the state. They're not saying that this is for equal redistribution of wealth. They even said, I've heard in some of this forum, particularly Julius Malema, he said that if the land belongs to the state, we will only distribute it based on if the person is going to approach the state and say, I'll use this land for this particular purpose. Now, who has the capacity to farm the land? Who have the capacity to work the land? The people who have dispossessed the land, which is the same white people. No reparations paid to black people. And you expect black people to even make submissions and tell you that this is what we would want to do with our land.
So in the event that perhaps the state does get to own all of this land, do you think that they would be willing to give it to black people who don't want to farm on it, but actually want to build property on the land, or want to build hotels, or develop the land differently outside of agriculture? Because not everyone wants to be a farmer.
I agree, and that's why my contention and the Black Centric Forum movement's contention is that this thing of moving to land is too much. It's actually ignoring the fact that we're coming from a victimizing past. 400 years of mass incarceration, indoctrination, dehumanization, and the Black Holocaust. What should come next? It must be reparations. Land retribution or restitution should become a part of the reparations committee. The British, all of them need to be called to question. They need to pay reparations. All of these banks, I mean, I've read in some files that the apartheid government prior to 1994 have opened 844 bank accounts in 196 banks all over the world. We need accountability for that kind of money before you can go to land retribution or restitution. Because here is the thing. If you're saying now the only thing we need to focus on, after wives were raped in front of husbands, after some of us were sold as slaves, after some of us were killed for no good reason, the only thing you want is land return. We do not have even the machinery as a state to say if maybe we're taking all the funds that and they will belong to the state. You won't even have the capacity to farm. Because why? The preceding imperialists have taken all the wealth. Queen Elizabeth's mansion is even built out of gold. We need compensation for that before we even can focus on land return. Because now, therefore, we'll be able to say, if I receive reparations in the form of industrialization, I believe that I'm good in business. I can do business. And somebody can say, okay, well, I need land. I want to be a farm. But land is not all about farming. Game reserves are part of land ownership. All of those oceans and everything that belongs to the country. But at the end of the day, we can't all be concentrating on that. We're in an evolutionary process economically, and therefore black people need to be pushed abreast because our clock is 400 years behind. So we need reparations first before the land.
And in terms of, the concerns that you have about people not having the capacity to work the land or the capacity to make the land be able to actually contribute towards the GDP, what do you think then would be the way forward? Should we continue with the Section 25 amendment? What exactly do you think is the solution to everything?
I think the solution to everything first is for us to know what exactly was agreed on CODESA's negotiations. You live in South Africa. You are told that in 1990 there were compromises made and there were arrangements made between the politician, the black politician, and the preceding imperialist. You do not know the papers. They are not made public. And they say democracy should promote transparency. We need to know what is it that have been done with this CODESA. You need to deal with the basics. The root of a problem. The root of South Africa's problem, inequality, poverty, and black suffering today, plus economic exploitation, should be dated back to where? To CODESA, where everything took place. That's why people right now are very ravaged and angry at Nelson Mandela and his ANC, because we do not know what these fellas have agreed with the oppressor. We need to have those files first before you can talk about land. Mm-hmm. And then when we have seen the agreements or compromises, we can then say, as a nation, can therefore decide whether this will work in this particular relationship between the colonialist and the victim. Because now they say we are living in a rainbow nation, but it looks like it will only be rainbow when black people are deprived of certain characteristics and resources.
Well, Sister, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Transparency seems to be the key to unlocking the solutions rather to this land debate.